Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
I was just asked to be part of a debate about the Shroud of Turin on Piers Morgan Uncensored. Now, I can see you rolling your eyes because I did the same thing. Piers Morgan? Really? Piers Morgan? I wrote a Substack about this, which kind of addressed it all much more formally, but I wanted to freestyle it here on the show and talk about it and maybe play some sound bites so you can hear what it was all about. But imagine me, I get up in the morning and I open my email and it's a producer with Piers Morgan Uncensored reaching out and saying, we would like an atheist's perspective on the Shroud of Turin. Now there's this resurgence of the story in the news after a Brazilian digital graphics expert analyzed the shroud, and he says that it was made by draping the cloth over a low relief statue. So now the argument is it wasn't even a human body, let alone Jesus Christ, who was under the Shroud of Turin. It was a statue, and this was created as medieval era art. And so now all the Shroud apologists jump back up and they're freaking out and saying, oh, of course, it's the Bible, you know. Those secular scientists have got it all wrong again. And so every few years, the Shroud of Turin pops up in the news. I think people just get bored. It's like the discovery of Noah's Ark. Every few years, somebody discovers some boat-shaped piece of dirt or a rock or something. Oh, look, there's some wood somewhere in the Middle East. I wonder if it was the Ark, and everybody loses their minds. So what do I do with this invitation? Am I an expert on radiometric dating? Do I know anything about first century artifacts or the medieval era or any of that? Why do I have anything to offer? I'm not qualified. So of course, I agreed to go on the show. I'm like, well, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a historian. When do we start? It's actually, it was the second debate request I got in my email this week. The first one was from none other than Ken Hovind. Ken Hovind, the young earth creationist apologist. Dr. Dino is what he so often has called himself because he supposedly is an expert on the dinosaurs and he has proof as to why Adam and Eve hung out with dinosaurs. You know, humans walked the earth at the same time. And this guy used to go out from church to church and Christian school to Christian school influencing children. That's terrifying. Then he's convicted of fraud, goes to prison. And after that, I think recordings came out of him domestically abusing his wife. I mean, the guy's a nightmare. So even Christian apologetic circles want nothing to do with Ken Hovind. They don't even return his calls. He is not on the fringes of Christian apologetics. He's out in the void, right? He's in the phantom zone spinning out in the cosmos. Nobody wants to talk to Ken Hovind, and yet he wants to get noticed. And so his tactic recently has been to reach out and tap atheist activists on the shoulder and try to bait them into another argument about young earth creationism so that he can get noticed, so that no one will forget his name. I mention it here only because it amuses me. Okay, that's not like he's going to get any extra support from this audience. Ken Hovind is a punchline in both non-religious and religious circles. I get an email. Ken Hovind appreciates your respectful approach to discourse and is interested in having a debate about biblical creation. And I stared at the email and I hit reply and I said, thanks for the offer, but I would rather put out a campfire with my face. Yours in Christ, Seth Andrews. And I sent it. And I amused myself so much that I screenshotted it and I put it on Facebook, and it's got like a squillion likes. It's awesome. It's just awesome. Anyway, the next email comes in from the producer of Piers Morgan Uncensored. They want an atheist perspective on the Shroud of Turin and this latest news. I would be joining two other academics. The first guy is a 1st century CE shroud. It belonged to Jesus. The proof is overwhelming guy. His name is Dr. Jeremiah Johnson. Now, of course, whenever I hear Jeremiah Johnson, I think about the old Robert Redford movie. It's one of my favorite movies, Jeremiah Johnson. You ever see it? It's a great Sidney Pollack film from like 40 years ago. Okay, anyway. And then there was another academic, also a Christian, pretty reasonable guy, actually. I wouldn't mind having him on my show. Let me think about that. But he is part of the Shroud of Turin research project. His name is Dr. Joseph Aceta, who was able to speak scientifically about the dating of the shroud to the medieval era, like 13th, 14th century. So these were two believers who were going to go back and forth for about 20 minutes while I waited in the wings in the digital green room for my chance to sit at the table with these guys. And so I'm back here, and I'm telling you, this guy, this Dr. Jeremiah Johnson is... smooth isn't the word. Slick is the word. I said in my Substack article, I said, you could mix up Pennzoil, Vaseline, and banana peels, and the result would still be less slippery than Dr. Jeremiah Johnson. This guy was a Gish Gallop Olympian. He was blowing through. He's like, and so-and-so is a PhD, and I've done this, and no one's visited the Shroud Museum more than I have, and I've examined the thing, and it's on display, and we've done our testing, and PhD so-and-so, who's a friend of mine, and I've done this, and the academics who posted in Nature magazine, and the encyclopedia is the wealth of knowledge that we have, and blah, 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 is literally like he did not draw breath. I'm convinced that he practiced being able to exhale for 5 straight minutes without having to draw any air into his lungs. That's how, and he was like super salesy. He's like, and you know, Piers, whenever I've been out there, I'm so excited to have these conversations about the Shroud because, you know, I was a skeptic too back in the day. And I remember when it just gave me a bad taste in my mouth. He was really talking at the audience instead of to them. I can think of a bunch of people in my zone who might be impressed. You know, obviously, if you've got somebody who looks that well informed and that well prepared, and they are degree mongering to beat the band. PhD, 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 author, historian, archaeologist, archivist, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I can see how this would overwhelm someone who is not an expert. And they would be like, wow, they really know their stuff. I mean, if you were to put this guy on Joe Rogan, Joe would probably literally declare him God, drop to his knees and begin to say prayers and worship the man. Okay, so I get it. But he was also so used Kari when he was talking to Piers Morgan about, you know what? Let me just play a segment. Let me play a little segment. Stick with me. Listen to what I listened to while I was waiting in the wings.
Piers, hold my ice cold Coke Zero while I answer these, will you? I love this because this is my area of specialty. First, I want to show you something, Piers. I've never shown this on any interview I've done. I just got this from the land of Israel. You just pointed out the fascinating correspondence of the wound marks in the man of the shroud. I'm holding in my hand, Piers. This is not a replica, Piers and Dr. Aceta. This is an actual Roman crucifixion spike that was from the Syrian province. I do a lot of work in archaeology, Piers. I've been in more first century tombs than any guest you've ever interviewed. And this is 6 inches long. It's an iron spike.
Oh my goodness, he has visited so many tombs, and he's holding a generic crucifixion spike that is potentially 2,000 years old. Nobody signed it. It's not marked in any way. It's a spike, but it's very impressive.
We have type AB blood, human blood, and there's some very fascinating work from an immunologist who I just spoke with last week at this conference, Kelly Kurse. It's human blood, it's type AB blood, it's Semitic blood. When the arms are so long, and it does look like they're very long, Piers, because when we believe when Jesus falls to the ground, do you remember, Piers, from your gospel reading that Jesus collapses under the weight of the cross? He can't even get to Calvary. Simon of Cyrene is tasked to carry the crossbeam. And do you know why? We believe that Jesus had lost 1/3 of his blood volume during the scourging. Let that sit in for a minute. He was dying of dehydration, high levels of ferritin, creatinine, based on the blood samples that we have on the shroud. He would eventually die of a massive heart attack on the cross. The reason his arms, though, are so strangely long on the cross is because his shoulders were separated during the crucifixion, and that's what makes the arms look so long.
So the person crucified exhibited the symptoms of anyone who would be crucified: massive blood loss, probable heart failure, or at least maybe they died of shock, and we've got dislocated shoulders. Obviously, when you're hanging by nails, that doesn't seem unreasonable, regardless of who you are, if you're hanging on a cross. But wait a minute, it's time for some magic.
The thing that's fascinating me, if I may, Piers, is the amount of energy. This is what I want to get to, because this is the latest science and truly breaking news on this program. I just interviewed Paulo de Lazzaro. And what's cool about Dr. Aceta and the original STIRP team, Piers, that I respect about these men and women, Dr. Aceta was one of 26 scholar scientists who went to Turin, Italy to study this. They're not pastors with a theological axe to grind. They were not privileging this. Even though Dr. Aceta is a believer, they were applying the scientific method. Ray Rogers, who died a great defender of the shroud, famously said, "Give me 15 minutes and the scientific record, and I'm going to prove this is a complete forgery." He wasn't saying that a few minutes later after studying it, which is really fascinating to think about. When I look at the power, though, Paulo de Lazzaro is doing some amazing work out of ENIA Laboratories. He's a physicist who works with lasers. And this is something that's gone viral when we've shared it. He has postulated the amount of energy it would take to make a chemical change in the flax, in the linen fibrils, because remember the image, Piers, it doesn't absorb like the blood does. The blood fully absorbs into the shroud. The image is just 2 microns. Piers, if you took a razor, you could literally shave off the image on the shroud. It's that thin. It's almost unbelievably thin. And this is what science cannot replicate.
See what I'm talking about, right? I mean, I think it's off-putting. He is, Jeremiah Johnson's a bigwig. He was at least one of the pastors at Prestonwood Baptist Church in Texas. Prestonwood is a major church. It's a city of a church. I think Prestonwood runs 20,000 members. It's unreal. And, he also has his own organization called the Christian Thinkers Society, teaching pastors and Christians how to become thinkers and thinkers how to become Christians. That's what it says. And the first video you see on Johnson's website is his discussion about the Shroud of Turin with a very constipated looking Tucker Carlson. I did a whole show on Tucker Carlson. This guy's a nightmare. He's a cretin. He's a bigot. He's a sexist. He's a jerk. He's an opportunist. He's a grifter. He's just garbage. And so there's Tucker, and Tucker's got that interesting. He's got that look on his face like, wow, here we are exploring biblical truth. Thank you so much, Dr. Jeremiah Johnson. That's on the homepage. On that same site, he's pitching his latest book called Body of Proof, a study on the resurrection of Jesus. And he's got several Jesus books. This guy loves him some Jesus. He's got the Unanswered Bible Study Kit, the Jesus Discoveries, and so much more. Okay, I've got audio from the other guest, and then I will play my responses for you. And I'll get to that next. Hang on. Seth Andrews and Piers Morgan. These are two names I never thought I would hear in the same sentence. So as Dr. Jeremiah Johnson's going through his spiel, he's throwing the word science and scientific out almost like it's a tick. The science says, scientific, science. Dr. Joseph Aceta is over there, and he said quite a bit, but he summed it up with this.
The four pillars of authenticity from a rigorous scientific perspective are: one, its age. It has to be 2,000 years ago. Two, we have to show that the cloth ensconced the body of Jesus Christ. Three, there has to be some sort of chain of custody that shows that, where was it for the last 2,000 years ago? And four, there's no mention of this. There's a glaring absence in the Gospels of this image. And, you could rationalize all those, but those are hardcore scientific factors that have to be established before you claim rigorously that this is the authentic burial cloth of Christ.
Now, my take on the shroud is this, and it's really one of the reasons that I wanted to have this discussion. I had a few reasons. First of all, it's a pretty big signal boost, right? I'm not speaking to the choir. I want to go out and actually engage with the rest of the world, even if it means Piers Morgan. And I've told people this: if Fox News asked me in the right context on a subject I could speak to, if they asked me to pull a Pete Buttigieg and sit in the chair and offer my opinion, position, etc., I would probably do it. I wouldn't be nearly as good as Pete Buttigieg. That guy's a damn superhero. But, if it was in my wheelhouse, it's what I do every day. And if I was able to literally walk into the lion's den and challenge those people on their own turf, I wouldn't be opposed to it. Some people said, if Joe Rogan ever had you on, would you, and I can't stand Joe Rogan. Would I go on his show? In the right context, I would. If I was speaking to something that I was, if not an authority on, at least extremely well versed on, and if I was able to say exactly what I want. And one of the things I would say is, what the fuck is wrong with you, Joe Rogan? Why are you platforming so much disinformation, pseudoscience, conspiracy theories, grift, and generally awful people? He might lump me in with them. He might turn on me, but someone's got to say it. And what are you doing? You have a responsibility. You're not just having conversations. You are feeding the beast. And, to have the Joe Roganites sitting out there listening to this, they might turn on me. Actually, they would. But it doesn't mean the things don't need to be said. And if I say them here, that's fine. But to say them there on his own channel, I'd do it. I would do it. Okay. And so if Piers Morgan wants me to show up and talk to an apologist, I'll do it. And I wanted to talk about not the shroud itself as much as, what about the Jesus story to begin with? Because both of these Christians, the first century shroud of Jesus guy and the medieval shroud was faked guy or whatever, they're both acting and operating like Jesus was a real dude, Jesus Christ, the God-man Jesus. That's their premise. They're actually building on that foundation. So then the conversation about the shroud is, well, do you think the shroud belonged to Jesus? Did it cover Jesus? Or was Jesus covered with something else that will never be discovered? And this was art, an artifact. It was, the image of another crucified and buried person, or it's just a damn fake. The whole conversation assumes Jesus Christ. And I'm sitting over here in the green room going, ask the question. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show up. And I'm going to say, hey, maybe we should be talking about whether or not the dude in question was actually the dude in question. If we found a hammer, would we start discussing whether or not it belonged to Thor? Is that where this discussion begins? Or do we have to start with, hey, was there a literal Thor? So let me play you this segment Let's see, it runs just a few minutes. I mean, to his credit, Piers did not interrupt me after he tragically introduced me as the thinking atheist. And I had to correct him. I'm not a great thinker. I'm not the thinking atheist. It's an icon. I had to start with that because, hey, somebody do some research before you invite me on. It's on the damn website. It's the first line in the podcast intro. I am not the thinking atheist. I'm sorry. It just irritates me. Okay. So he asked me, what are your thoughts on the Shroud? Here's what I said.
Do you think it's real? Do you think it's fake? Do you think the whole thing is just a PR stunt? What do you feel?
What I see mostly around the Shroud is a tremendous desire to believe, to connect dots. And it's totally understandable, people who lean into the Jesus story, but, whether or not it dates to the time of Christ or to the medieval era, and I tend not to discount the carbon-14 date. I think apologists are quick to brush it aside, and then they throw out a lot of fancy letters at the end, but I don't think that we have seen a debunking of the carbon-14 dating of the fabric. But even if it did date back to that era, I mean, we're talking about a time where the Romans crucified hundreds of thousands of people. And so now we're connecting a dot and saying this looks like a crown of thorns. And so therefore it is the Christ. And we root that in the Bible itself and the Christ account in the Bible, which is hugely problematic. I heard references to Josephus. I mean, the Antiquities was, 60, 70 years after the alleged death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Josephus was not an eyewitness, and the only reference to Christ was not about the crucifixion, the resurrection, certainly not the Shroud of Turin. The Gospels, I mean, they're not reliable because I think the earliest Gospel being Mark was 69, 70-something CE, long decades after these events were supposed to have happened. The authorship of all four Gospels is not known. Nobody has pinned them down. Nobody can authenticate them. And beyond that, the Bible is the same book that makes all kinds of claims we might reject in another context, whether it's giants, 900-year-old people, donkeys that spoke Hebrew, and a savior baby that was born via ghost sex, if you will, to a virgin, so that the offspring could grow up and sacrifice himself, blood sacrifice, to rescue us from the very torture chamber that God created. So all of this about the Shroud, it's interesting. I find, the God who is not the author of confusion, though, I would think would have parted the curtain of the sky, and he would have said to all of his children, yes, it's me, or no, it's not. I don't think that's unreasonable. Jeremiah Johnson, still with that car salesman look on his face, just as slick and smooth as you can be, decides he's going to jump in and respond. Here we go.
Jesus Christ, the historical record is so clear that in the 89 chapters of the gospel, they all point to that Jesus really lived, he died, and even the greatest skeptics alive of that time had experiences of seeing Jesus alive after he was dead. You can look at my book, Body of Proof, the 7 best reasons to believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus, and you can see that I never mentioned the Shroud of Turin. Isn't that fascinating, Piers? I don't believe the Shroud is authentic because I want it to be, and as followers of Jesus, we don't even need the Shroud to be authentic as our best evidence of the resurrection. We have so many other lines of evidence, but what's fascinating... Yeah, exactly. It's not an article of faith. And what's fascinating to me is when you look at the historical records, they stand on their own. Even atheist scholars like Garrett Ludemann said, and others say, I cannot argue with the fact that the earliest followers of Jesus were first hostile to the Christian message. They had experiences of seeing Jesus alive after he had been dead. And they say, now, what kind of experiences those were, we can't explain, but we know those experiences not only changed the lives of the followers, but also changed the world forever. And again, there's such great evidence for the authenticity of the Gospels. We know that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote the Gospels. We know that Paul writes 20 years before the Gospels, that incredible passage that no serious historian or scholar calls into question in 1 Corinthians 15, saying, this is the gospel, that Christ died for our sins, according to the scripture, he was buried, and he rose again on the third day, according to the scriptures. A quick note about Josephus, there's some phenomenal work being done, published by Oxford University Press, T.S. Schmidt, Josephus absolutely knew and had firsthand acquaintance with those who attended the trial of Jesus. So friends, again, you have your choice. You've got to think for yourself. This is what I do at Christian Thinkers Society. You've got to get beyond the sound bites. You've got to get to the substance, read these things for yourself, and you'll be amazed. Christianity doesn't need to be defended. It stands up for itself.
If I may.
Well, fascinating debate. I did, yeah, very quickly, yeah.
Well, I'm not sure we can quote the Bible to prove the Bible. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are written in the third person, and were not written by a Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Mark itself was actually written by 2, possibly 3 authors. And even if Josephus had referenced the Christ in the year 100 CE, it wasn't a direct reference. We're still in the arena of hearsay. This is not evidence.
You guys are in deep theological territory here.
Now, I go back and forth on whether or not I should have derailed in this way. I mean, they wanted to talk about the shroud, right? And I was more interested in biblical authenticity and sourcing and hearsay and all that. I mean, actually getting back to the Christ story itself. I don't know if it was in the medieval time. I believe it is. I think the majority of the evidence that is not being posited by Bible apologists, I mean, those people front-loaded their discussions with, hey, we believe that Jesus Christ existed. We're going to lean heavily into anything that looks like, it really looks kind of like white Jesus, but whatever, all right. You know, and then the unexplainable atomic light that burned the image into the fabric, you know, they didn't have the technology. No one knows how it was done. It must be Jesus. And of course, you and I are saying the same thing. Okay, fine. It looks like a guy. Let's say it was a man. Did he sign his work? Did Jesus take a Sharpie and say, that's me? And he literally tagged it so everybody would know? He did not. Why the hell are we arguing about the shroud all this time later? It's a piece of cloth that's got some stuff burned or painted into the fibers, and it's the image of a guy. Whee! Ooh, ah. You know, I said in my blog, it's really the equivalent of the Weeping Lady of Fatima statue. You know, people see anything that looks, I don't know, they just so desperately want to believe. It's the Jesus fish stick. Oh, look, it's the imprint of the Christ on my fish stick. Thank you, Jesus. Let us pilgrimage. Let us load up the church bus and we'll go thousands of miles to witness. And the fish stick has been taken and it has been preserved in a kind of epoxy so that it will not rot. And now it's been framed and placed on a pedestal, and it's under, you know, it's behind bulletproof glass, and it's anchored to the ground so it can't be stolen. And for only $29.99, you too can come into the Fish Stick Jesus Museum. And pay homage. I mean, I'm obviously being facetious there, but you know what I'm talking about. This is Jesus tourism, as far as I'm concerned, right? It's Jesus tourism. Look at the Holy Land. Don't tell me Jerusalem is not a tourist mecca for Christians who genuinely think they are walking in the literal footsteps of God, and they're bringing artifacts, it's, you know, just stuff. They're bringing stuff back. This could have been the place where Jesus carved a table. This could have been where Jesus walked as he brought the gospel to humanity. These could have been the seas he sailed as the nets were cast off and the fish were brought in. This might be the place where he gave the Sermon on the Mount. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Could have been, might have been. We think it probably was. The possibility is these are not truth claims. It's fucking tourism. Sorry. I get keyed up. I tried not to. I didn't swear on the Piers Morgan show, but I wanted to. That guy was going off, and I literally wanted to reach through and just shake him and go, first of all, take a breath. Secondly, well, the Gospels say is not an argument. Is not an argument. That's my rant. Was it a mistake to do the show? Did I perform okay? I'm not fishing for compliments. But, you know, I went toe-to-toe with a Shroud of Turin apologist. I think it came off. I think I represented you and us okay. And you can go back and watch it. The first 20 minutes are the two academics, and then I bring up the rear, as I should, right? I brought up the rear, the bottom. And I don't know, you can tell me what you think in the comments section. I'll see you back here in just a few days for our official podcast release. See you then.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter for a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming free thought events and conventions. Log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.